F-22 fighter jets, B-52 bombers, AC-130 gunships, AH-64 Apache attack helicopters, MQ-9 Reaper and RQ-7B Shadow drones, in addition to M777 howitzer artillery and M142 HIMARS rockets. The Russian and Syrian forces never got to within rifle range of their US targets. 4 hours later, when the fighting was over, more than 100 of the attacking forces had been killed, though sub-estimates put that loss at closer to 330. The only casualties on the US SDF side was a single wounded SDF soldier. The lopsided nature of the encounter, due to primarily the overwhelming and accurately directed air and artillery strikes supplied by the US, underscored the uneven nature of the current US and Russian military forces, as well as their relative abilities to use combined arms in a coordinated fashion. The massive response was also seen as a deliberate warning to Russia not to take the US or their allies lightly. That leads us inescapably to another interesting question. Could the US on its own invade and conquer the country of Russia? Alternatively, could the US, with NATO's help, conquer Russia? Bluntly, right now there's no way the US, even with NATO's help, could physically invade and conquer Russia. Even if Russia failed to use their nukes, and you can be certain they would, there's simply no way the vast country of Russia, stretching through 11 time zones, could ever be fully occupied and pacified. Hold on though, let's break this answer down, and then we can talk about some other ways the US could possibly, actually, very probably destroy Russia. It's becoming clear in the modern age that no moderately well-supplied country would be able to be occupied and defeated as long as their people maintained the will to fight. A perfect example is the relatively tiny country of Vietnam. They were one of the first countries to soundly defeat the Mongol Empire in the 13th century and resisted French occupation right up until the Japanese invaded them in 1940. After the fall of Japan in 1945, they went on the offensive to drive the French out of their country. And when they were successful, and the US tried to defend the area of South Vietnam, they fought for more than a decade before driving the US out as well, despite suffering as many as 1 million casualties. Cambodia next thought they could occupy Vietnam's Mekong Delta, but in a mere 2 weeks, the Vietnamese routed the attackers and occupied the capital, Phnom Penh, which they held until 1988. China then invaded, thinking that they could impose their will on the ruling Vietnamese government. But the Vietnamese went toe-to-toe with the mighty Chinese army, and after some brief but intense fighting, managed to force them to withdraw, though China considered the event merely a short, punitive expedition. Such determination to defend one's homeland would undoubtedly be faced in Russia as well, but of an order of magnitude far greater. Many segments of Russia see the current invasion of Ukraine and the implied aim of NATO to hang a strategic defeat around Putin's neck as one of an existential crisis for their country. Since Russian media is nothing more than an echo chamber for their dictator-in-chief, most commentators mirror Putin's own comments when he says that in light of such a defeat, I do not even know if such an group as the Russian people will be able to survive in the form in which it exists today. You can expect that, just as they did with their Herculean efforts to defend their country against the onslaught of Nazi Germany in World War II, Russia will fight on against any invasion, no matter the costs, the consequences, or the forces arrayed against them. They might even find a willing ally in China, who has been eyeing sections of Russia's Far East territories around Vladivostok that as recently as the 1850s were part of Greater China. It's entirely possible that China would be willing to help support the defense of Russia in exchange for what they currently consider historical Chinese territory. There is evidence that China has decided it's in their best interest to keep Russia as an intact nation in order to divide Western opposition. Both countries share an intense dislike of what are perceived as US hegemony throughout the world. And now that Russia has seen its oil and natural gas outlets in the West curtailed by sanctions, by necessity, they've had to turn to China and India as their two primary sources for exploiting petrochemicals. Even closer cooperation in the future is only inevitable. But wait, there's one more option. What if the US managed to topple the Russian government? This may be the trickiest of the three topics to answer. In short, yes, the US could probably topple the Putin government at any time if they wanted to. But there was a recent event that showcased just how precise US strikes have become, an event that may have led Putin to decide to travel in a special armored train and to spend much of his time in isolated bunkers in Siberia, far from the active front lines. On August 2nd, 2022, the US sent a pair of specially modified Hellfire missiles to take out Ayman al-Zawahiri, one of the al-Qaeda leaders responsible for planning various attacks on US and Western targets, including the 9/11 attacks, the bombing of the USS Cole, multiple bombings at US embassies in Africa, and and others. He was tracked to a residence in Kabul, in the middle of a densely populated area, but the two drones were so precise that the US claimed Zawahiri was the only casualty of the operation. According to published reports, he was taken out while he stood on the second-floor balcony of the residence with the missiles equipped with Ginsu knife-like projections. The strike was publicized in a series of press conferences, with additional US government officials warning that no matter how long it takes, no matter where you hide, if you are a threat to our people, the United States will find you and take you out. No doubt Putin took that very serious. But US military and diplomatic policy has matured since the 1950s and 60s, when the CIA routinely toppled governments, many of them democratically elected, in countries like Iran, South Vietnam, Chile, Guatemala, the Congo, and others. Nowadays, the US prefers to let its military-industrial complex do the talking, such as when they toppled Saddam's regime in Iraq. In retrospect, despite the overwhelming military victory the US achieved, the end result was ultimately seen by many as seriously flawed. The US had no plan to replace the removed Iraqi government with any kind of stable and reliable replacement. And that may be the one main reason why the US doesn't want to topple the Putin dictatorship. There are fears that whoever might replace him could be far worse. But one element of his arsenal that Putin has dared not yet use is his nuclear arsenal. He probably knows that as long as he doesn't employ nukes, that the West will worry he's the only thing holding back a massive nuclear war. He's betting that the US and the West will worry that whoever comes next might not hold back. And so, we've come full circle. It's clear that the one ace in the hole that Russia still holds on to is its nuclear deterrent. Putin dare not use them, but fear that doing so will unleash a horrific response from the West. Putin has to threaten to use them in fear that their possible use is the only thing keeping NATO from sending actual troops to drive the Russian invaders out of Ukraine. And the West dare not take Putin out directly, for fear that his replacement might be willing to use nukes in an act of suicidal revenge. And so the world balances on a precarious knife's edge, closer to a nuclear holocaust than we've been since the Cuban Missile Crisis of the early 1960s. It would be best if all sides could take one giant step back from the precipice, but Putin seems incapable of backing down, and the brave Ukrainians are determined to take their country back, as well they should. The most likely outcome is that some oligarch will find a willing accomplice in Putin's cook staff, and the Russian president will succumb to a bout of severe intestinal distress, following which some level-headed replacement will endeavor to repair the massive damage Putin's done both to Ukraine and to his own country. At least, that's what many sane people hope. Don't forget, before he was the leader of the Wagner Group, the oligarch Yevgeny Prigozhin had a very special nickname, Putin's chef. But what do you think? Could the US military conquer Russia all on its own? How would they do it? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more military analysis from military experts. China's Navy is catching up to the US, but while China's naval capability has come a long way from the Third Taiwan Crisis, its apparent strength is not all it seems. Here's why. Here are two of the most powerful countries in the world. Both China, the fourth largest country in terms of area, spanning approximately 3.7 million square miles, and the United States, which is the third largest country by land area, covering about 3.8 million square miles, are major economic powers with substantial global significance. China has the world's second largest economy with a GDP of approximately $18.1 trillion in 2022. The United States, however, has the largest economy globally, with a GDP of about $25.46 trillion in 2022. Okay, so the US has got China whipped when it comes to land area size and economic success, but what about military power? Well, here's where it gets scary. China aims to position itself as a significant global military power and has set its sights on achieving global dominance by 2040. Right now, China's Air Force ranks second, just behind the United States, which possesses strength. According to reports, the United States operates approximately 10,000 more air platforms compared to China. In terms of total aircraft strength, China is listed as having 3,260 aircraft in service, while the United States boasts an impressive fleet of 13,233 aircraft. This substantial difference emphasizes the United States' superior and its larger operational aircraft count. What about sea power? One of the markers of a superpower is the ability to project maritime power over long distances. States enormous influence in regional or world affairs and can exert huge leverage over their less capable rivals. It is therefore not surprising that as China's it has invested Combat ships and other small ships capable of bearing anti-ship missiles. China's carrier strike have also acted as a de facto maritime nation, harassing vessels from other countries in international waters. China's navy has the numbers, and it's bad news. It is increasing in the quantity of ships as well. China was seen putting its new naval muscle to use in the summer of 2022, following a visit by then House Speaker Nancy Pelosi to Taiwan. For several days after Pelosi left, Chinese ships and aircraft demonstrated their military potential in the waters of Taiwan. This show of force would have been inconceivable 25 years earlier, in the third Taiwan Strait crisis of 1995-96. At the time, when Taiwan was set to witness a direct presidential election and became a full-fledged democracy, the mainland launched several missiles across the Taiwan Strait, prompting the United States to send two carrier platforms to the area. China had no choice but to back down in the face of such pressure, but the Chinese leadership never forgot the incident. To them, it recalled a century of humiliation, the time of the 19th and early 20th centuries, when China repeatedly found itself at the mercy of foreign powers. Since the Chinese initial offensive of Taiwan and border province, continued American and Allied military support for the island reminds them of those times. After the crisis, China resolved to never let such a scenario happen again and took steps to increase its naval power. This was a deviation from the norm. With only a few brief exceptions, China has never historically been seen out. It has traditionally focused its military resources on maintaining a large army capable of defending its vast land borders. Until recently, the objective of the Chinese military. However, China's continued problems with Taiwan is contained within the natural barrier of the Persian Gulf chain, a string of islands off China's waters which stretch from Japan to Indonesia. Japanese leadership decided that only by becoming a sea power would China take its rightful place as a true global superpower. With its growing economic might, especially since it joined the World Organization in 2001, China finally had the chance to plug the naval targets. Included in China's big naval assets are three aircraft carriers. China's navy also plans to increase the number of its carrier force up to 9 by 2030. More to come after that. PLAN also aims to increase its submarine force by building 10 ballistic missile submarines in the same year. China's naval capability has come a long way from the third Taiwan crisis. Its apparent strength is not all it seems. China may have more vessels in its fleets than any other country, but that is because most of the ships are still small. Aside from the number of ships, one way to measure a state's naval power is through the combined tonnage of its fleets. Tonnage is the measurement of a ship's weight. The PLAN's total combined tonnage as of 2020 is between 1.8 and 2 million tons. The US Navy, though, stands at 4.6 million tons. The reason why tonnage matters is because it's a small vessels in comparison with it. In addition to naval competition, the United States can build smaller boats if it wanted to, but instead focuses on sturdier vessels with the largest offensive and defensive weapon and robust transport options for reduced stage and increased speed. Many American policymakers have called for the United States to build warships and restore the Navy to Cold War level fleet sizes. No one in Washington is calling for an imitation of China's forward position to Storm Patrol rather than looking for harm to the US Navy, including in its global mission to maintain secure and free navigation of world oceans. China has closed the tonnage gap since the time of the Taiwan Strait crisis, when the United States had a total tonnage gap of 1 million, but it still lags significantly behind. China's Navy has other problems. Two of its much publicized aircraft carriers are older models. They use a smaller, short takeoff and arrest and recovery system, which is planes. China's third aircraft carrier, uses a more modern catapult system comparable to those used by the US Navy's carriers, which allows it to launch its onboard planes faster. Fujian is therefore China's technological capability. However, how would China be able to launch its planes without pilots deployed? China has a serious shortage of trained naval aviators, and Fujian and its successors will have to stress both in the number of pilots these new carriers will demand and in teaching them how to use the catapult system. Overall, the PLAN is many decades behind the US Navy's institutional knowledge and experience. Case in point, it lacks a fighter with specifically trained carrier pilots. The current aircraft of choice is the JL-9G, a single-engine twin-seaplane that is incapable of simulating emergency landing from the carrier's flight deck because it is too light and slow. So far, the PLAN's attempts to create an adequate training aircraft have fallen short of satisfactory. establishing programs for cadet naval aviators has also proven difficult for the FAA.